So in this video, I want to explain to you if grammar is actually important to learn, because you see all these YouTube videos where people who want to become fluent in Spanish, and we're going to go through what that means, asking if it's even important to study grammar. And so in this video, I'm going to clear this question up and give you a full elaboration of it. If you don't know me, my name is Hamid. I'm 16 years old and I became fluent in Spanish and actually became a polyglot at 13 years old after the summer of 2022, in which I became fluent in Spanish. So here's my before and after.
Hola, estoy comiendo comida. Voy a mejorar mi español. Y ahora puedo hablar de más o menos muchas cosas, pero hay un límite.
Y pues en este video voy a hablar en español por un rato para mostrarte que hablo español. Let's first talk about what fluency is. Now, if you're watching this channel, you should have one clear goal in learning Spanish, and that is to get fluent in Spanish. Now, when we say that, what does that mean? We're going to go through now. I'm going to go through what I call the fluency equation. So firstly, I remember when I first started learning Spanish and I started seeing all these videos and they were talking about what is fluency? What is fluency? How can we define it? Simply put, fluency is the flow. The flow is being able to have this, back and forth. It's in the word, actually. In Spanish, if you want to say to speak fluently, you don't say oh, I'm fluent. Instead, in Spanish, you say to speak with fluidity. If that makes sense, right? So that's basically what it is. To speak with fluidity, to speak with flow. But the best way to define it is to separate it into two categories, which is conversational and native fluency. And so conversational is what the goal is, because no one really cares about writing letters in perfect Spanish, right? No one really cares about being able to write the perfect essay about the Second World War in Spanish. Now, that comes into native fluency. Of course, as natives, if you've gone through the education system, you've probably spent tons of time writing many essays and many different things in the respective native language. That's why those skills, like being able to read a language, is important when it comes to native fluency. But when we just talk about conversational fluency, which is 99% of people watching this video, that's all they care about. Well, then the flow, the fluidity is in the conversation, not necessarily only in your speech or your text, only in the conversation. Meaning this back and forth is the goal. And so as an equation, this is what it looks like. It looks like this, where a conversation is, I speak, you understand. You speak, I understand. Now, if you've seen previous videos, you should already pretty much know this. This should be memorized at the back of your head. So we want to speak, and we want to speak real Spanish because our goal is to understand real Spanish. And if you want to learn more about these concepts like real Spanish, just watch any of my other videos. So any conversation, we know that fluency is conversational fluency, which is the flow in the conversation. Now, so in a conversation, it is that I'm speaking, you understand me, and then we switch. You speak, and I'm trying to understand you. In any conversation, independent of the language, right? It doesn't matter if it's the language. Now, I remember when I was doing grammar, and firstly, just to reiterate on how I got fluent, I firstly studied grammar, then I did two exercises, which was a speaking exercise and an understanding exercise, which is how I got fluent. And I got fluent in about 120 hours of studying, which is extremely fast. Actually, in the montage I showed you, the directly after the summer was the point of 120 hours in. So you can see I wasn't speaking perfectly fast. The flow wasn't necessarily only in my speech, but I could easily have conversations and have a back and forth, which was the goal. Again, a lot of people think I'm lying when I say I only studied 120 hours to get fluent. When I say fluent, I'm talking about the flow in the conversation, not me being able to speak extremely quickly. Now I can speak with a decent, pretty good flow in my speech, and I'm able to speak with a very fluently, I would say. But even now, I've only studied 180 hours. Now, I remember one of the days when I was studying grammar, and this was 7th grade, right? A long time ago. And I was on the train, basically. If you don't know, in Sweden, in Stockholm especially, the metro station is what everyone uses is to travel around. And so I take the metro to school or the train to school rather. And I just remember I was taking one of these grammar lessons and I was thinking wait, but Spanish sentences can just be simplified into two aspects. And this is what this video is about, okay? So let's talk about, should you study grammar or not? This is what we're going to answer now. So Spanish sentences can just be simplified to two parts, which are grammar and vocabulary. So let's talk about that a little more. So grammar is basically where the words are, so where we place certain words, and vocab are just words. So basically, in any sentence, there's a list of words, right? Think about how these games where they scramble a bunch of words and you want to make it a coherent sentence. Think about that. with just vocabulary, you just have the words. Okay, so for example, let's like, I, cat. Okay, those 3 words. Now, those are vocabulary. Those are just words we know. But then grammar is basically the order of these words. You wouldn't say like cat's eye. You would say I like cats, right? So just like in Spanish, the order of the words basically, and how the words are structured in a sentence, basically how vocabulary is structured and put into a sentence to create the meaning of the sentence, is what grammar is. And so if you think about it, and if you just forget all the other sort of aspects that people try to overcomplicate, which basically always fall under the 2 categories of grammar and vocab. Grammar and vocab is basically all you need to know for making sentences in basically any language. Now, different languages have different parts. For example, like Arabic will have, you can extend the vowel in Arabic or extend the sound, or in Chinese, right? And then that might be an addition or a part of grammar, right? But basically any language, especially now when we're just talking about Spanish, it is basically just, do you know the words and do you know how to use the words? Spanish grammar is basically just simplified into just verbs and how you use them. So there are a bunch of rules basically, and this is not what many people teach you. A lot of people online try to teach without giving concrete rules, and I'm actually go through how to now study grammar. But to answer your question, the why I clicked on this, the person trying to reach conversational fluency who's watching this video right now, should you study grammar? And the answer is simply yes. But here is the key, differentiator, because everyone needs to study grammar, right? And ignoring these hate commenters who are talking about dreaming Spanish and spending 2,000 hours on dreaming Spanish to get conversational. Like, honestly, I've spent less than 200 hours, and I'm honestly more fluent than these people. I don't want to sound arrogant or anything. I'm just saying, you don't want to waste your time, and I'm not here to waste your time. I'm here to give you what actually works. So grammar can be simplified into just verbs, basically. Verbs and then some grammar rules. Like, for example, the mete, se, le, lo, etc. These types of pronouns come before the changed verb, right? These are very specific rules, but there's a very specific way to study grammar, okay? Now, vocab is very simple. You just have to know how to pronounce the words, and you just need to know some basic letters, right? Just basically know how to pronounce the words and then just know the words. And now knowing vocab is basically just memorization. Now, there is ways to work around it to avoid it. For example, there's a difference between scrolling on Anki and hearing the word roller coaster when you're growing up. We both know the word roller coaster in English. I bet you haven't gone on Anki or Quizlet and challenged yourself for those words. So there are different ways to study vocabulary, and I've made videos on those. The exercise I use is called transcript training. I want to talk about grammar because I've made videos talking about narrative contemplate, how to speak and how to understand real Spanish. I've talked about real Spanish. I talked about this fluency equation a million times, but I haven't really gone into grammar, and I wanted to really discuss this topic with you. So let's talk about the 3 W's, which is where I'm going to explain some parts about grammar. So we know that we need to speak and understand grammar. Okay? That is the basic part. We need to speak and understand grammar because what's the fluency equation? Speak and understand. So that's the first thing. Every single time you're studying Spanish, it will have to be through the medium of either speaking it or listening to it in an audible way, right? Not understanding in the sense of reading. I'm talking about understanding through audible input, not through reading or writing, because our goal is never that. So it makes no sense to study that. If our goal is to get stronger abs, we'll have to train abs. You can train bench press, and maybe the core is used in bench press to stabilize, but you probably will get stronger abs if you train your abs rather than if you try doing squats, which sure, it does engage your core, but the goal was never to just engage the core. The goal was to train the core and get better at the core, to get a stronger core. So anytime we're going to study grammar, it should fall into this fluency equation of speaking and understand audible input. That's why I don't teach, when I teach grammar through my course to my clients, which by the way, check the description if you're interested. I always teach it through videos where I speak and then I ask the people a question. In my course videos, I ask them, okay, how do you say this? So not only are they hearing me explain it, but they also are forced to speak the grammar. And that is exactly what I also did with the language transfer course, which is what I did to take and to learn grammar, or Spanish grammar, when I was getting fluent. And so that's simply why that is so important. Now, most people find grammar extremely hard and excruciating. And the reason why is because they just don't do this. So let's just talk about firstly the 3 W's of what they are. So firstly, in any Spanish sentence, there are 2 parts. What and where. Basically, what the words are and then where the words are placed. So you can see there's 3 W's though. The first W is what? Vocab. The second W is basically where. But there is actually a third W, and firstly, most people just memorize the what and the where, and that makes it not make sense. And this is where that third W comes in. So think, for example, ¿cómo estás? Everyone knows the what and the where, right? Everyone knows the word ¿cómo and estás. Everyone knows the words, right? But like if you ask them, explain ¿cómo estás? They'd look at you like dumbfounded because they don't know. And so the reason why they struggle with grammar is because they do not understand the why. They don't understand where the word estás comes from. They don't understand the root verb of that. They don't understand that all Spanish verbs are in 3 verb endings and 2 groups. They don't understand that, for example, it's not supposed to be pronounced como estás. It's supposed to be pronounced como estás because they don't know how to pronounce the vowels, for example. And all of these can be simplified into the why. And this is why this is so important. If I asked you, why is it como estás? If you knew the answer to that, you would understand como estás much better. Because when you understand why certain things happen, then it makes more sense. And when it makes more sense, you remember it better. This is just a simple thing about learning in general. You know those people in class who used to say that they're visual learners? I learn better when I'm looking at a screen. I learn better when the teacher's explaining it to me. The only reason why people learn better through visuals, people learn better through YouTube videos or like oversimplified, you know, that YouTube channel that explains history, for example. The reason why they learn better that way and they remember it better is because it makes more sense that way. Of course it does, right? If I watched a video of an oversimplified thing about World War II, that would make much more sense to me because it's simplified, it's explained. That's why the teacher explaining it is so much more like effective in terms of learning than just reading the facts straight. And in this example, it's if you just memorize the what and the where, it is so much worse than if you just first had the what and the where, but then had the why explained. This is why there's tons of people saying, I'm a visual learner. No, you're not. The reason why you're a visual learner is because when it's visually represented to you, it makes more sense. And when it makes more sense, then you learn it. Then you remember it better, right? It's stuck in here better than if it was just read out to you. And this is also why the teachers that just give you a notebook and a packet and just make you read it, those teachers are the teachers that usually aren't the best teachers, rather than the teachers who sit down and explain a concept and like draw pictures. So this is the reason why most people go about studying grammar in the worst way possible, which is just memorizing grammar rules and memorizing these things. Now, obviously, you do have to know the what and the where. What is vocabulary, of course, but basically, you do have to know some of these grammar rules. But when you understand why certain words occur, why do we say presentar for the word to present? Why is it like that? Why do we say ¿cómo estás? Why? And so this is the problem with most grammar textbooks and materials. They are written in for text, meaning we're reading and writing, which isn't part of the fluency equation. But the primary reason why most grammar study methods are ineffective is that they don't teach the why. And this is what I found so great about language transfer, is because the teacher actually sort of gives you a reason why, even if the reason sounds irrelevant. Like the reason why it's el problema instead of la problema is because it comes from Greek. You know, it's interesting. I actually learned this thing in one of these psychology books I was reading, okay? And it was that giving a reason is better than giving no reason, because when there's a reason, then it makes more sense in our brain. And when it makes more sense, then we're able to justify it more. So for example, if I cut in line, or if I asked to cut in line and I gave you a reason, even if it was like a invalid reason, like if I said, oh, can I cut in line because I'm going to buy these things? Even if I just said that, like, of course I'm going to buy these things, right? Just because I added the word because, the person would literally be more obliged to let me cut the line. Like, this is literally a fact. You can go research this. And so giving reasons in general, explaining why things happen, automatically just makes your brain connect. And when your brain has these like connections, they just remember better. Like the thing is making sense. If you want to make it, like the word makes sense is basically just your brain connecting the dots. And if your brain is able to connect the dots, it will remember the information better. And that is why the why is so important when it comes to learning grammar. And so when learning grammar, opt for audible sources like YouTube videos and online courses rather than textbooks. And make sure to understand why certain things happen. You can even literally ask AI, why is it como estás? Can you explain to me how we got there? Literally just ask that. And so to answer the question in this video, should you study grammar in order to get fluent in Spanish? Yes, it's a must. But the way you study it matters. If you are doing it through the memorizing way, you might as well just do Duolingo, okay? most people try to do it that way, which is why most people don't, like, most people's average of getting fluent is like 3 times, 4 times as long as it took me. Honestly, people don't believe me online when I say I got like conversationally fluent in that time. It's just a fact. Like, this is the reason why. And so instead of sitting here being like, oh, no, he's definitely lying, just try it. Like, honestly, try this right now. Like, literally, if I can even prove it to you. Watch any of my videos, okay? Try the information and literally like come back the next week. I guarantee you. And the reason why I'm so confident in this is because I literally did this myself. I implemented the why. I learned why we get como estas. And I literally just like, what? That was my reaction. I was like, what? As a 7th grader. And if a 7th grader can make it make sense, there's no reason that you cannot. I don't know your age, of course, but you're probably not a 7th grader. As always, if you want to see more of these videos, presentation style videos where I go through a bunch of these concepts and frameworks, then just comment that. I appreciate the feedback. As you can see, I have tons of different frameworks to get fluent in Spanish and what I did. Lastly, if you want to actually implement these frameworks and finally start learning Spanish in a clear and structured way, check the description. And I hope this video helped you. Stay humble.